I learned to read on my parents' comic book collection, the late 70s to mid 80s Marvel to be precise, and boy did it honestly spoil me. I got Janet Van Dyne and Monica Rambeau as chairwomen of the Avengers. Spider-Man was an actual adult and not just a whiny high schooler. Marvel knew how to use Hawkeye as a character. X-Men God Loves Man Kills. Marvel was at the top of their game, making progressive moves left and right, showing the pros and cons of society, be it with having women leading the Avengers, Captain America rebuking the American government, becoming the captain, Iron Man being James Rhodes, the whole Phantom Rider Mockingbird in the West Coast Avengers book. There's just so much that makes me say that this is the best Marvel has ever been. And that attitude led to this. Cloak and Dagger are the quintessential characters that I've always pointed to when someone asks who's one of my favorite characters. Technically it is me cheating a little because it's 2 characters, but hey, anyone who's seen my top 5-ish vids knows that I can't go with an easy answer. And believe me, I've had my personal collection gutted repeatedly, but these are the comics that I could never get rid of. And maybe at the end of this reader's history, I'll give a very personal story relating to these characters. But either way, I'm the Comic Archivist, and this is the reader's history for Cloak and Dagger. Part 1.
If there's a risk, I'm gonna take it. Gonna get it, gonna get it.
Gonna get it, gonna get it. Gonna get it, gonna get it.
I'm gonna get what I came for. I'm gonna get what I came for.
Cloak and Dagger began as the brainchild of Bill Mantlo, a name that should be known by more comic readers of this current generation. Seriously, he created Rocket Raccoon, The Micronauts, Rom, and just God, so many fantastic books. In an article for Marvel Age number 6, in build-up to the release of their limited series, Mantlo wrote that, after agreeing to write for Spectacular Spider-Man, Mantlo had no idea what he was going to write. He had said yes, as any writer would, to writing a big-name comic like Spider-Man, but without any real idea on what the story should be. So he would go on these excursions throughout New York City just to think and kind of avoid his deadline. It was on one of these treks to Ellis Island where he finally got the inspiration for these characters. And I quote, "They came to me in the night, when all was silent and my mind was blank. They came completely conceived as to their powers and attributes, their origins and motivations. They embodied between them all those fears and misery, hunger and longing that had haunted me on Ellis Island. I wrote the story. I think it was the best story I've ever written." However, my favorite quote about Mantlo's view on Cloak and Dagger came from an interview in Marvel Age number 25. With Cloak and Dagger, I'm trying to deal with children at a very vulnerable and frightened age, where life is seen as oppressive, something that is conquered. I want these 2 kids to find a way to survive, and to come out of this process changed and better. And the way they're going to do this is by helping others. Fun fact, this interview was actually done with Kurt Busiek, which just makes me giggle considering how big of a name he is today. This may be a very comic book nerd-happy reader's history. Sorry for everyone who came in strictly for loving the show. So, Bill Mantlo dreamed up these characters, but Ed Hannigan is a co-creator for a reason. The visuals for these characters are very much in his wheelhouse, and as he recalls from back issues number 45, circa 2010, Bill had a short page or 2 synopsis of the story that he showed me, and we discussed what the characters would look like. He gave me a lot of leeway, but it was fairly obvious that Cloak would be black, and have a big, animated black cloak, and Dagger would be white with a skin-tight leotard type thing. I'm not sure, but I think I might have come up with her ballet angle. I put the same kind of amulet clasp on both costumes, and came up with the dagger-shaped cutout on her costume, which was quite daring at the time. Another interesting detail is that Al Milgrom is actually the inker on their first appearance, and those dark, moody, and frankly gothic inks would become so iconic for them in their 80s run. However, he wasn't actually given credit for their inks originally. It was accredited to Jim Mooney in their first appearance, but nope, it was Al. Yes, I am going off Bill Mantlo's article in Marvel Age number 6 for that info. I really do want to get into the societal background for why these characters were so big, but this series is me generally reading and giving the history of the characters on a readership level. But if that sounds like something you'd like to know, let me know in the comments below. Quick thing, I am reading this from a digital copy of Crime and Punishment, the first trade collection that collects their early appearances before the first volume, and I think the colors were bumped or corrected a bit. Okay, now that I've gotten all the preliminary stuff out of the way, let's finally dig into Peter Parker's Spectacular Spider-Man number 64, and the first appearance of Cloak and Dagger, with the aptly named issue, Cloak and Dagger. I'm not even going to touch upon where Spider-Man is in relation to his giant history, but currently he's swinging around the city when he hears a man screaming for help. The man is a pharmacist and screaming about needing protection after getting illegal drugs for some bad people, but it's too late. Cloak and Dagger have arrived for vengeance. Quick side note, I don't like color correction, mainly because, well, here's how the original panel looked. I know I'm being nitpicky, and I try not to really review the comics I read for readers' history, but I'm hoping you can understand why I dig the art from the single issues far more than the digital one I'm using. Okay, sorry, back to the plot. Spidey leaps in to defend a guy, but Cloak demonstrates the depths of his cloak, allowing for Dagger to kill the pharmacist with her light daggers. And Spidey is very much against that kind of thing, so Spidey goes after him. It does not go well for Spider-Man. We do learn that Dagger's daggers can follow their targets, which I think gets dropped from her power pool later on, or I just don't remember that being a thing. Either way, Spidey gets dropped with a combination of Cloak's darkness and Dagger's light before they teleport out of there. And Spidey's in a bad way, but I kinda love this one cop after Spider-Man flees the scene of the murder. It's just really rare to see anyone concerned about the superheroes in the Marvel Universe. The next day, Peter Parker talks to the chief researcher at the Daily Bugle, Max Stennett. Yeah, I'm fairly certain he rarely, if ever, pops up again, but who knows, that'll be for the inevitable Spider-Man reader history. But here's where we get the history of the chemist that Cloak and Dagger killed, and a big piece of the pie for their own backstory. Simon Marshall, the evil chemist, was a drug maker for the mob. Drugs so new and addictive that they aren't even listed in medical journals yet. There was a midnight raid on his lab set up on Ellis Island, and they found several runaways dead, used as guinea pigs for these drugs. With the new info, Peter dons his Spidey outfit and glides over to Ellis Island. Yes, I think that's use number 189 for his webbing, making it into a hand glider that maybe never pops up anymore. After Spidey has a really poignant moment about the history of Ellis Island, he hears a scream. And thus, Cloak and Dagger have kidnapped the heads of the mobsters responsible. But they can't know anything about the kids. The kids are all dead. But Cloak and Dagger survived. The drugs had done something with their genetics, assumably unleashing a latent mutation, but we'll get into that when it's developed more later, and they escaped into the night to become Cloak and Dagger. But Spider-Man breaks in on this execution, miffed that he's totally in the dark on this one. In the commotion of Spider-Man fighting Dagger, the gangsters try to escape, only to go into Cloak's cloak. He does let them go, but only so that they could go running out of a window at full force, killing them. With their revenge complete, Cloak and Dagger leave Spider-Man in the dark alone. And I absolutely love this, and frankly, it is one of my favorite issues of any comic ever written ever. Spider-Man is the obvious outsider in this story, but we still follow him because he's the hero. And by having that anchor point, Cloak and Dagger's vendetta just comes off so much more mysterious and impactful than if we were just reading straight from the limited series. There's an importance on how you introduce a character, or characters in this case, that can really place a specific tone for them. It lets the story speak for who they are, not the press releases or even the future of these characters. The characters return in Spectacular Spider-Man number 69. Pretty obvious since even the cover tells us as much. This time around, we actually begin with Cloak and Dagger going to an abandoned school where we have a gang beating up on their own for not selling to kids. They're actually very theatrical this time around, with Tandy almost toying with the gangsters before she takes out the lower goons. The head honcho, though, he gets the taste of the darkness from Tyrone. By the way, that's Cloak's real name for anyone who doesn't know. But they aren't after these lowly gangsters, they want the boss, and we get a name. Silvermane. Has Silvermane ever actually appeared in recent times? He seems like a very 80s character to me. Let me know in the comments, I'm genuinely curious. But we then cut to Spider-Man going through the home he grew up in with his aunt and uncle. For the trivia lovers, that house is in Forest Hills, Queens, New York. Of course, everyone needs to take a shot for P.D. Parker being angst-ridden thinking about Uncle Ben's death. This actually puts Spidey right where he can hear the sirens and swings off ambulance chasing. Well, cop chasing. Spidey finds out that of course it's Cloak and Dagger back on their crusade, but we do get some dialogue showing some singular characteristics between the two, such as Dagger saying she does want to do things that kids do, while Cloak is all about the war on drugs. But since Spidey's there and these two aren't technically heroes, that of course means it's fight time. Yet when Spidey gets cloaked, Dagger doesn't like how this keeps working out. Spidey has been only nice to them, although I wouldn't say that he befriended them like Tandy does, but still, she's not crazy about them continuing to zap Spidey. But her hand kinda gets forced when Spidey hops out of Cloak's cloak, swinging, and she has to zap him with her light daggers before they poof off. After some Peter Parker drama that I will stop highlighting now, Spider-Man swings over to Captain Jean DeWolf, and I suddenly realize that not a lot of non-long-term readers really know a lot about Spider-Man's life post-high school. Anyways, she tells him to go see the Kingpin, and he swings off to go see, oh sweet Christmas, my eyes! Close your robe, man! Anyways, Kingpin mentally scars me and gives the backstory we already know about Cloak and Dagger and gives Spidey the address for Silvermane. I assume it's because Silvermane is competition, or maybe this was when Kingpin was really against selling drugs and all that. Spidey swings off to Silvermane. I kinda love the fact that because his spider sense distracts him, he actually crashes through the window, while Cloak and Dagger come in right after him, stepping in all badass style. So a fight ensues as Spidey, Cloak and Dagger clean the clocks of the goons, leading to a brilliant ending where Spidey saves Dagger from a giant fire blast from Silvermane, who's just an old guy strapped to machines in his bed, and throughout the issue we keep seeing Dagger not being as antisocial as Cloak, so when Spidey goes, Dagger, you don't need to be a killer, she ultimately does choose to kill Silvermane. It's a heavy scene that really plays counter to what you think would happen. And just like that, Spider-Man again is left alone in the proverbial dark about all this. But then you get to the next issue, and this cover sorta says it all. This actually begins directly where the last issue ended, with Spidey having to dodge a hail of bullets from Silvermane's men. While fending off the goons, a doctor puts down a machine that begins to reconstruct Silvermane. Spidey escapes, but more importantly, we have, I think, the first real scene of Cloak and Dagger talking by themselves. At least without Spider-Man's unconscious body at their feet. Tandy is just so tired of the anger and vengeance alone. She does truly want to be normal. But this talk is interrupted by a drug sale in the alleyway right next to the building they're standing on, and Cloak and Dagger spring to stop the pushers. It sort of really adds weight to Cloak's viewpoint on this if the rooftop they're having their discussion about wanting to be normal is literally right above a drug deal, isn't it? But back to the main story, Silvermane is now ripping through New York, trying to find Cloak and Dagger, when Spidey hops onto the scene to try and stop him from finding and killing them. Of course, it's not a party until Cloak and Dagger shows up, and Cloak phases a full subway train into his darkness. But who'd have thunk it? Cloak's now very weak from the phasing trick, which means Silvermane has the upper hand, and clobbers Cloak quickly. But during the fight with Spidey, Silvermane rips open the tunnel, allowing Dagger to be bathed in sunlight, upping her power, which leads to just this wonderful panel where she just lets loose on him, and then he short-circuits and dies again. Spidey again tries getting through to Tandy about how she doesn't want to be a murderer, to which Dagger agrees, but she is bound to Cloak, and that is more important than anything else. And they vanish, again leaving Spidey alone in the dark to wonder. Next, we hop to Spectacular Spider-Man number 81, which asks the question, what does Spider-Man, Cloak and Dagger, and the Punisher all have in common? I'd assume the answer is operating outside of the law, but hey, let's find out together. We begin with Boomerang and Punisher breaking out of jail, but Punisher double-crosses Boomerang cause Boomerang's a bad guy, so he escapes by himself. The next day, Peter Parker saves one of his neighbors from some junkies trying to rob her. Cloak and Dagger sees this and chase the junkies down. Dagger takes out half the druggies and Cloak takes the other half. What is interesting is that now we see the real meat of their power. Those druggies are no longer shaking, strung out, or addicted to drugs. But shame for the druggies as Cloak and Dagger leave, Punisher is going to beat the crap out of them for information about their dealer. Later on, Spidey goes to a drug den and finds the junkies beaten to a pulp. Cloak and Dagger show up to say that they got what they deserved, and Spidey finally snaps and attacks them, like every other issue. During this fight though, Spidey says that he's going to stop the evil hold that Cloak has over Dagger. I like how this has actually never really been made clear to Spidey or the readers at this point, so without any future knowledge, you can see the logic to what he's thinking. But Dagger finally steps in to stop the fight, and we learn that they didn't beat up the junkies. Dagger uses her light burst power, cause that's part of it now, to show off all the bullet holes on the wall. But the druggies aren't dead either. They've been shot with the sedative bullets. Who would do such a thing? Could it be Satan? Nope, it's the Punisher. I actually kind of wish they didn't show any of those Punisher scenes beforehand and save the reveal for right here, just to make this a legit surprise and set up that Cloak and Dagger may be vigilantes, but on the scale of Spider-Man to Punisher, they do lean towards Punisher, but aren't the Punisher, if that makes any sense. So the next issue, it's everyone going after the Fat Man, the Kingpin. I know this isn't the Punisher's reader's history, but Mantlo decided that time in jail had made Frank Castle snap. I can understand shooting at the wife beater, but here's him shooting at a litterer. It's moments like this that I always point to when people say that Punisher's on the right path. Let's digress to the actual story though. Frank's going to go kill the Punisher, so Spidey, Cloak and Dagger are on their way to save him. Except Cloak and Dagger is sworn to kill the Kingpin, so they teleport out to get to him first. Except Spider-Man actually gets there first, but just in time for Cloak and Dagger to pop in. As always, Spidey stands between them and their quarry, allowing Kingpin to escape during the fight. But the Kingpin has another problem when he reaches his apartment. The Punisher is there. But who cares about that, cause while the interesting thing's happening upstairs with Punisher fighting Kingpin and taking his wife hostage, we have Spidey, Cloak and Dagger arguing about who's right or not. Eventually, Dagger does save Spidey from Cloak's cloak before they teleport to upstairs. When Spidey joins them, we see that Kingpin and Vanessa, his wife, are gone, and Punisher is knocked out. So with the story done, Cloak and Dagger poof out, and I think it's safe to say that this is a 5 out of 5 times Spidey has been left holding the bag by these people. Their first appearances in the Spectacular Spider-Man books were interesting to say the least. While it was only 5 issues, they were actually spaced out over 25 issues, and I think Spectacular was running monthly at the time, so that gave them a full 2 years of introduction, with the 2-parters they were in, adding to the mystique of the characters that really made them something unique. Even if I'm not quite sure Bill Mantlo stuck the landing on that last story, there is a good development of Dagger wanting to be normal, but Cloak does come off as a villain most of the time. That's not necessarily a bad thing, as we'll see later on. I just wish there was a little bit more development not solely on the nubile blonde girl. However, that is all for part 1 of the reader's history of Cloak and Dagger. Next week, we'll be looking at their first limited series, and boy is it going to be a heavy read. So be sure to click the subscribe button, hit the bell, and be sure to let me know what you think about the introduction of these characters in the comments below. While you're down there, if you're interested in suggesting some other characters, teams, or huge events for reader's history, let me know. Like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, and please consider supporting our Patreon so I can get out of using Windows Movie Maker. But even just a thumbs up and a share will help the channel in a big way. We have a long way to go before we reach that remonetization goal. But more than that, I'm the Comic Archivist, and stay golden, Inklings!